Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the flickering glow of the GPS tracker on his laptop screen. Megan's car was on the move, a steady blue dot making its way across town, far from the restaurant she'd described as her girls' night destination. His chest tightened as the realization sank in, his intuition colliding with cold, hard data. For weeks, Jake had felt the gnawing discomfort of uncertainty. Megan's radiant smile had grown just a little too practiced. Her kisses, once warm and lingering, now felt rushed, like afterthoughts. She'd been sneaking glances at her phone, her laughter muffled as she stepped into other rooms to take calls. These were little things, but Jake had spent years trusting his instincts. As an IT specialist, he'd been trained to recognize the smallest anomalies. He clicked on the GPS dot. The location displayed wasn't a restaurant or bar, it was the parking lot of a hotel. Exercising, the room felt colder as Jake absorbed the implications. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages Megan had sent earlier. Each word now seemed calculated. The cheerful tone, the unnecessary details about her plans, the exaggerated friendliness meant to deflect suspicion. He snapped his laptop shut and stood, grabbing his jacket. If the truth was ugly, he wanted to face it head-on. The hotel loomed ahead, its neon sign casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. Jake parked discreetly, killing the headlights before he turned off the engine. He didn't need to search long. Megan's car was there, unmistakable with its custom plate she had chosen the year before. She'd called it a symbol of their partnership. But tonight it mocked him. Jake leaned back into the shadows of his car, waiting. Time crawled, each second dragging against his patience. His hands rested on his lap, but his fingers itched to grab his phone. What was the point of evidence, though, when he could already feel the truth like a weight on his chest? After an hour, the hotel doors slid open. Megan stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. She wasn't alone. A man followed her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. They laughed together, the sound carrying easily in the still night air. Jake's breath hitched as he reached for his phone. He captured the scene in silence, the easy familiarity in their body language, the shared glances. When the man opened the car door for her, Megan turned her face toward him, her expression radiant in a way Jake hadn't seen in months.
"When can you join me?"
The footage was damning. It left no room for excuses or misunderstandings, but instead of storming out of his car, Jake gritted his teeth and held himself back. Confrontation wasn't what this moment needed. Jake's drive home was consumed with silent deliberation. Megan had chosen to betray their marriage. Jake, however, would ensure that her lies unraveled publicly and without mercy. Tomorrow would bring plans, but tonight it brought resolve. Jake sat in his car, the hotel looming behind him like a monument to betrayal. The video on his phone was damning, but it wasn't enough. Not for him. He needed more than a few stolen moments in a parking lot. He needed the kind of proof that would leave no room for denial or manipulation, a clear record of the life Megan had chosen to build outside their marriage. He turned his car around and headed home, his mind already constructing the next steps. If Megan thought her secrets could stay buried, she underestimated the man she'd married. Jake's calm exterior wasn't a weakness, it was his shield. Beneath it lay a mind that thrived on unraveling complexity, on finding answers where others saw only chaos. The next morning, Jake avoided Megan, who was still recovering from her late night out. She'd returned home quietly, slipping into bed as if nothing had happened. Jake had pretended to be asleep, his back to her, his breathing slow and steady. When she touched his shoulder lightly, he hadn't moved. Her fingers lingered for only a moment before withdrawing. She presided 30 minutes before arriving at school. Now, as sunlight poured into the kitchen, Jake sat alone, his laptop open and his coffee untouched. He worked methodically, piecing together the story of Megan's betrayal. He started by checking her phone records, calls, messages, anything that seemed out of the ordinary. Then he moved to financial statements, scrutinizing every expense that couldn't be accounted for by their shared life. The deeper he dug, the more the pieces began to fall into place. There were hotel charges that didn't align with her explanations, and receipts for meals at places Jake had never been. But what caught his attention most was a pattern of payments to a name he didn't recognize: Ryan Tucker. The amount wasn't large, but it was consistent, suggesting something ongoing, something deliberate. Jake stared at the name for a long time before opening a search engine. Ryan Tucker wasn't hard to find. His social media was public, and it painted a picture Jake hadn't expected: a man full of confidence and charm, posting photos of lavish dinners and weekend getaways. One picture in particular made Jake's jaw tighten: a candid shot of Ryan and Megan, taken at a rooftop bar Jake had never heard of. Her smile was radiant, her body language relaxed in a way that seemed foreign now. By afternoon, Jake had everything he needed to paint a clear picture of the life Megan had hidden from him. But he wanted more than digital breadcrumbs. He needed something tangible. Using the GPS tracker still connected to Megan's car, Jake found her location. She was at the boutique gym where she spent several evenings each week, supposedly to work on herself. Now Jake wondered how much of that was true. He drove there, parking across the street where he had a clear view of the entrance. After 20 minutes of waiting, Megan walked out, her hair tied back, her face flushed. Ryan followed moments later, wearing gym clothes that seemed to emphasize his casual arrogance. They spoke briefly by her car, laughing before Ryan placed his hand on her shoulder, his touch lingering just a moment too long. Jake filmed the interaction, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew this wasn't the end game. It was merely the next step in his growing collection of evidence. He wasn't impulsive by nature, and he wouldn't confront them here. If they were this comfortable in public, they wouldn't see the storm brewing until it was too late. By the time Jake returned home, the quiet fury inside him had crystallized into a plan. Megan's betrayal wasn't just a personal affront. It was a violation of everything they'd built together. And if she thought she could keep living this double life, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. As the sun set, Jake sat in his office, reviewing the footage and notes he'd compiled throughout the day. Each revelation was another crack in the foundation of their marriage, another reason to ensure that when this came to light, Megan and Ryan would have nowhere to hide. He clicked the save button on a folder labeled The Truth and leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow, he would set the final pieces of his plan into motion. Jake sat in his study, the dim glow of the desk lamp illuminating the evidence spread before him like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Photos of Megan and Ryan laughing in the parking lot, hotel receipts, and GPS logs painted a picture of betrayal so complete it left no room for doubt. But Jake wasn't interested in just exposing the truth. He wanted it to resonate, to cut deep, and leave no opportunity for excuses or deflection. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about reclaiming his dignity and ensuring the full weight of their actions crashed down on them. The strategy takes shape. Jake started by revisiting the video evidence he'd collected at the hotel. The footage showed Megan leaning into Ryan's embrace, their bodies close, their connection undeniable. He selected the clearest moments, editing them into a succinct, indisputable timeline. He knew he needed more than visuals to seal his case, so he compiled financial records showing Megan's unexplained expenses alongside phone records detailing her frequent calls to Ryan. Next, Jake made a list of key allies who needed to see the truth: Megan's parents, their closest friends, and a few trusted confidants. He wasn't aiming to destroy Megan's life entirely, but he wanted her web of lies to unravel in the most public way possible. He printed copies of the evidence and stored digital versions in a secure folder, ensuring he had multiple backups. Enlisting help. Jake's next move required someone with a knack for subtlety. He called his cousin, Eric, who ran a private investigative firm. Eric had always been the black sheep of the family. Resourceful, a little too daring, but fiercely loyal. Jake explained the situation in broad strokes, and Eric didn't hesitate. "Send me what you've got," Eric said. "I'll dig deeper and see if there's anything you've missed. If this guy's done this before, I'll find it." Jake emailed Eric the files and leaned back in his chair. Having Eric on his side added a layer of reassurance. Eric would uncover any skeletons in Ryan's closet, making Jake's case airtight. Crafting the moment. The heart of Jake's plan lay in the confrontation. He didn't want an angry shouting match or a scene that could be dismissed as impulsive. He envisioned something quieter but devastatingly effective. Something Megan and Ryan would never forget. Jake reserved a private room at the same hotel where their affair had unfolded. He planned the confrontation to coincide with Megan's next girls' night out, ensuring her alibi would crumble alongside her composure. He called the hotel manager, explaining that he needed access to one of their conference rooms for a surprise event. "You'll get your moment," the manager assured him. "We'll ensure privacy and discretion." Jake's lips curled into a grim smile. Privacy wouldn't last long, but details danced in his head like so many flowers. The letters. Jake spent hours drafting letters. The first was for Megan's parents, a straightforward account of her actions supported by evidence. He kept the tone measured, presenting the facts without unnecessary venom. He knew her parents adored her, and while their judgment would likely be clouded by love, the truth would be impossible to ignore. The second letter was for their mutual friends. It was less formal, more personal. A plea for understanding mixed with a declaration of his intent to move forward without shame or hesitation. He included photos and receipts, ensuring that anyone tempted to take Megan's side would think twice. The third letter was for Megan. This one was raw and emotional. Jake poured his heartbreak and anger onto the page, not to hurt her, but to exercise the weight of betrayal that had been crushing him for weeks. He ended with a line that rang with finality. "This is not about revenge. This is about truth. You've spent months weaving lies. I'm simply cutting the threads, setting the stage." The day of the confrontation arrived. Jake woke early, his mind sharp, and his emotions surprisingly calm. He reviewed the evidence one last time before packing the letters and files into a leather briefcase. He dressed in a tailored suit, a subtle act of defiance, a reminder that he was no victim. At the hotel, the staff greeted him with quiet professionalism. The conference room was pristine, its large windows offering a view of the city skyline. Jake arranged the evidence on a sleek glass table, each piece meticulously positioned. He placed Megan's letter in the center, flanked by copies of the evidence. The call. As dust settled, Jake received the text he'd been waiting for. "Heading out for dinner." Megan wrote, "Don't wait up." They couldn't make the place together, but they definitely had to hang out. He texted back a simple response, "Have fun." Jake's patience had always been one of his strengths, but tonight he felt its full power. He didn't rush or second-guess himself. He knew Megan and Ryan would arrive soon, their guard down, expecting a night of indulgence. When they finally walked into the room, Jake was waiting, calm and composed. Megan froze, her face draining of color as her gaze swept over the evidence laid out before her. Ryan's confident smirk faltered, replaced by confusion and then dread. "Welcome," Jake said, his voice steady. "Let's talk." This was the moment Jake had planned for, not to lash out, but to ensure the truth hit them like a freight train. He gestured toward the table. "Every lie has a consequence. Tonight, you face yours." The room was cold. Despite the elegant decor, Jake sat in a leather chair at the head of the table, hands folded in front of him, his expression unreadable. The evidence lay arranged before him, Photographs, financial records, GPS logs, all carefully positioned like weapons in an arsenal. It was a tableau of betrayal, meticulously constructed to ensure there would be no escape. The door opened, and Megan stepped in, her laughter ringing in the corridor behind her. She stopped abruptly when her eyes met Jake's. Her confident demeanor faltered as she noticed the room's setup. Ryan followed closely, his easy smile vanishing the moment he saw Jake. "Jake?" Megan's voice was tinged with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Jake didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, his gaze fixed on the two of them. The weight of the moment pressed down on them, and Jake could see their unease growing. Finally, he gestured to the chairs across from him. "Sit," he said, his tone calm but firm. A conversation of truths. Megan and Ryan exchanged glances, their hesitation palpable. When they finally sat, Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He slid the first photograph toward them, Megan and Ryan entering the hotel. "I thought we'd have an honest conversation tonight," Jake began, his voice measured. "Something you've been avoiding for months." Megan's hands trembled as she picked up the photo. "Jake, No," he interrupted. "Don't explain yet. Just listen." He slid the next piece of evidence forward, a receipt for a luxury dinner at the same hotel. Then another, a GPS log showing her car's location on nights she claimed to be with friends. With each new revelation, Megan's face grew paler, her eyes darting toward Ryan, who sat stiffly, his jaw clenched. "The reckoning. You thought you could lie your way out of this," Jake continued, his voice soft but unyielding. "You thought I wouldn't notice the late nights, the strange expenses, the way you looked at your phone as if it held your real life. But you underestimated me." Ryan finally spoke, his voice defensive. "Look, man, this doesn't have to be a big scene. Relationships are complicated. You should hear Megan out." "Stop!" Jake said sharply, cutting him off. "You don't get to weigh in on this. You're a thief, stealing what doesn't belong to you and expecting to walk away unscathed. This isn't your moment to speak." The rebuke left Ryan visibly shaken. Megan's voice cracked as she tried to salvage the situation. "Jake, please, let me explain. It's not what you think." Jake raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Oh? Then what is it, Megan? Tell me. Help me understand what all this means." Then collapse. Megan stumbled over her words, her explanations fragmented and incoherent. I didn't mean for this to happen. It was a mistake, Jake. I never wanted to hurt you." "A mistake?" Jake echoed, his tone biting. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying something you don't mean in anger. This," he gestured to the evidence before them, "is a calculated, deliberate betrayal. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise."
Yes.
Tears streamed down Megan's face, but Jake didn't waver. The moment wasn't about her emotions. It was about the truth, laid bare in a way she could no longer deny. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bravado crumbling. "Look, Jake," he said, attempting a conciliatory tone. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. This isn't about what you meant," Jake interrupted, his voice cold. "It's about what you did, and now you'll face the consequences." The final blow. Jake pulled out the letters he'd written, sliding one toward Megan and another toward Ryan. "These are for you," he said. "Read them later. They're detailed accounts of everything you've done, backed by evidence. And, Megan, your family and our friends will be getting their copies as well." Megan's eyes widened in horror. "You wouldn't." "I already have," Jake said, his calm tone hiding the storm raging inside him. "They deserve to know the truth. You lied to everyone, not just me. You betrayed the trust of people who loved and respected you. Now they'll see you for who you really are." Ryan tried to interject again, but Jake silenced him with a glare. "You should be more concerned about your reputation, Ryan. I've forwarded this information to your employer. Something tells me your confident, carefree persona won't hold up under scrutiny. Megan collapsed into her chair, her tears now uncontrollable. Jake, please. I can fix this. We can fix this. Jake stood, his chair scraping against the floor. There's nothing to fix, Megan. You made your choices and now you live with them. I'm done. Walking away, Jake collected his briefcase and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned back one last time. I hope you both enjoy your future together. Whatever's left of it. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed through the room. Megan and Ryan sat in stunned silence, the weight of their actions and Jake's calculated response pressing down on them. Jake stepped into the night air, his chest rising with a deep breath. The confrontation had been everything he needed it to be. Clear, controlled, and devastating. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. This chapter of his life was over, but the next was waiting. The days following the confrontation were a whirlwind of revelations, silence, and irreversible consequences. Jake had expected a storm, but even he hadn't anticipated the sheer scale of its impact. The truth, once unleashed, rippled through Megan and Ryan's lives like an unstoppable tide, sweeping away everything they'd carefully built on their shared lies. Megan's collapse. Megan returned home the morning after the confrontation, her face drawn and her eyes bloodshot. Jake had already packed a bag and moved into a temporary apartment, leaving behind a curt note, "Don't contact me unless it's about the divorce." She tried calling him, but he didn't answer. Desperation replaced denial as she faced the wreckage of her decisions. Jake had sent the evidence to her parents, her siblings, and their close friends, people who had admired her as a loving wife and partner. The responses were swift and unkind. Her mother's voice trembled with disappointment during their phone call. "Megan, how could you do this? Jake didn't deserve this. We raised you better than this." Her closest friend Claire was even more direct. "You lied to all of us. I don't know if I can trust you anymore." Megan's professional life suffered too. Word spread quickly through their social circles, many of whom were also clients at her boutique PR firm. Clients began canceling their contracts, wary of associating with someone whose personal life had become a public scandal. The same skills she once used to craft narratives and maintain reputations couldn't save her now. Ryan's reckoning, Ryan's fall was equally swift. The package Jake sent to his employer included not only the affair's details, but also evidence of potential conflicts of interest. Expenses charged to company accounts for his meetings with Megan, disguised as business dinners. His boss wasted no time calling him into the office. "This is unacceptable, Ryan," the CEO said, sliding a copy of Jake's evidence across the desk. "You've not only violated company policy, but jeopardized our reputation. We can't afford this kind of scandal." By the end of the week, Ryan was out of a job. The confidence that had once defined him dissolved into bitter resentment. But he had no one to blame but himself. His attempts to reach Megan for solace went unanswered, her shame too great to bear his presence. Jake's liberation. For Jake, the fallout brought an unexpected clarity. The temporary apartment he rented, though small and impersonal, became a refuge. Free from Megan's deceit, he found himself rediscovering parts of his identity that had been buried under the weight of their crumbling marriage. He reconnected with old friends, people he'd unintentionally distanced himself from during the years he'd poured everything into his relationship. Conversations were cathartic, laughter felt genuine again, and he realized how much he'd missed. The simple joy of being with people who valued him for who he was. Work also became a sanctuary. As an IT specialist, Jake had always thrived on solving problems, and now he channeled his focus into challenging projects. His colleagues noticed the change. His sharper concentration and revitalized energy didn't go unnoticed by his supervisor, who hinted at a promotion on the horizon. Reflections and resilience. Reflections and resilience. One evening, Jake sat by the window of his apartment, sipping a glass of wine as the city lights flickered outside. His thoughts wandered to Megan, not with anger, but with a quiet acceptance. She had made her choices, and though her betrayal had hurt deeply, it had also freed him. He no longer felt tethered to a life built on false promises. He began attending therapy, not because he felt broken, but because he wanted to understand himself better. His therapist encouraged him to confront the pain, not bury it, and to use it as a foundation for growth. The sessions were transformative, offering him tools to rebuild his life with intention and purpose. Moving forward, months later, the divorce was finalized. Megan didn't contest it. She knew there was no point. Jake walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than he had in years. He hadn't just ended a marriage, he'd closed a chapter of his life that no longer served him. To celebrate, Jake took a solo trip to the mountains, something he'd always wanted to do but had postponed during his marriage. Hiking through the rugged trails, breathing in the crisp air, he felt a profound connection to the world around him. Each step forward felt like a reclaiming of himself, a reminder that life, even after devastation, could still hold beauty. As he stood atop a ridge overlooking the valley below, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they marked a moment of transformation, a turning point where he chose not to be a victim, but a survivor. Jake smiled, the wind brushing against his face, and took a deep breath. The future was his, and he was ready to embrace it.